Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. If President Trump believes the EU was created to, quote, screw the United States, what does the future hold for European-American relations? Let's get to the bottom line. Suddenly, Russia is America's friend again. Also suddenly, Europe is being accused of hypocrisy about its liberal democracy, and it's being lectured about how it can't take Uncle Sam to be Uncle Sucker. The U.S.-led talks to end the Ukraine war are being held without Ukraine, and European countries were cut out as well, as Donald Trump argued that they didn't do anything to end the fighting for the past 3 years, so why should they be invited now? Trump says Ukraine has no cards to play, and now Kyiv is signing concessions on its mineral resources to pay for U.S. aid already received. So is it any wonder that heads are spinning across Europe? For 80 years, European leaders could safely assume that America was really their ally, or at least their best friend, and that it would always defend them in an all-for-one and one-for-all alliance. Well, now can they be so sure? Today, we're talking with Ed Luce, the U.S. national editor and columnist at the Financial Times here in Washington, and he's author of the upcoming book, Zbig, The Life of Zbigniew Brzezinski, America's Great Power Prophet. Ed, thank you so much for joining us today. Look,
always a delight.
We have been talking foreign policy for a long time. I want to play a clip for you of President Trump's thoughts about Europe right now. Let's listen.
European Union is a different case than Canada, different kind of case. They've really taken advantage of us in a different way. They don't accept our cars. They don't accept essentially our farm products. They use all sorts of reasons why not. And we accept everything of them. And we have about a $300 billion deficit with the European Union. Now, I love the countries of Europe. I guess I'm from there at some point a long time ago, right? But indirectly, pretty directly too, I guess. But I love the countries of Europe. I love all countries, frankly, all different. But the European Union's it was formed in order to screw the United States. I mean, look, let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. And they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president.
And I want to understand this moment where the President of the United States is talking about European Union, which has been a sort of centerpiece of success of U.S. foreign policy for decades, and saying the European Union was formed to screw the United States. What are your thoughts about this moment?
Alice in Wonderland, surreal. I mean, the European Union was formed, Treaty of Rome, 1957, at the prodding of the United States. Successive Democratic, Republican, Truman, Eisenhower administrations. The Marshall Plan, the greatest sort of act of aid in history to rebuild post-war Europe. America very, very wisely and skillfully conditioned aid to European countries on the degree to which they cooperated and pooled their resources. In other words, America helped create the European Union for a very good reason, that it would make war again on the continent impossible, or at least very unlikely, and that it would produce the kind of prosperity in the European Union that would create markets for American companies, but also stave off the communist threat, the appeal of communism. And it was one of the grand, and I think unique in history, successes that a hegemon, that a big imperial power would actually, for enlightened self-interest, for benign reasons, create a collaborative bloc, the other side of the ocean, of the Atlantic, for its own good, but also for America's good. And Trump is signaling the end of that era, and it's an extraordinary repudiation. I'm still digesting, and apparently Zelensky is a dictator, and Putin isn't, and Trump refuses to call him that. It is sort of turning everything upside down. Look, this is a hinge moment in history. This is a hinge moment in a way that Trump 1.0 simply wasn't. This time, he's got his own sort of instincts on steroids. And I think Europe has recognized this. And to me, the moment of a sort of most deep realization that this is a change was when Friedrich Merz, the incoming German chancellor, actually a couple of days before the German elections said, we would like France and Britain to extend their nuclear umbrella to Germany. I never expected a German leader Germany, which is more dependent and more close to the United States in many ways because of history than any other significant Western power.
Well, Friedrich, and just to take your point a step further, Friedrich Merz, now after the election, has says that Germany and Europe must achieve independence from America. We must become independent in our security. We must, and he said that America is no longer part of the equation.
It's no longer and cannot be seen as a friend. And he expressed sort of amazement that he was saying this on television to German viewers. But how would you instrumentalize European independence? Well, the nuclear deterrent, and there are two nuclear powers. So that kind of conversation has gone from being hypothetical or sort of marginal to being absolutely central in the space of a couple of weeks. And it really began, I think, with J.D. Vance's speech in Munich of all places, with the history that Munich sort of conjures up, attacking his hosts, the German government, and other European liberal democracies for being their own worst enemy. Russia's not an enemy, he said. You're your own enemy. And you're your own enemy because you're quarantining the far right in Europe, the neo-Nazi AfD party in Germany. This was a profound shock to the Germans in particular, that an American vice president could come in and tell Germans that they should be bringing their own neo-Nazis who've broken, many of whom have been imprisoned, these leaders, and who've broken German laws about using the Sieg Heil and the swastika and so forth, that an American president would come and say that that was a sort of snap moment, that you can't really undo that. Everything's changed really since then, in the 2 weeks that have passed since then.
What does the UK do this? I ask this not just because I know you're British, but does the British position, you have the British Prime Minister visiting Washington this week, is it better to become a lapdog of Donald Trump, or is it better to refine your alliances with Europe, even though the UK left Europe?
Yeah, it's very complicated for Britain. You know, Brexit, now suddenly looks very, well, not suddenly, I think to some of us all along, looks strategically like a big blunder, not just economically, but strategically. Look, I mean, Starmer has come to Washington, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, came earlier in the week. They are bringing what I like to call bringing fruits to the volcano. Trump is this sort of force.
Explain fruits to the volcano to our, this is sacrifices to the great stormy god, right?
Yes, the lava god, so that you try and appease it, you try and flatter it, you offer it obeisance in the hope that you will stave off its anger and any eruptions that, volcanoes tend to do. And so they've been bringing fruits to the volcano in the hope that they can moderate Trump, particularly on Ukraine. And if that fails, which I think it will, then it makes it easier to sell to the public back home, Starmer in Britain, Macron in France, and so on, the need to radically change course and aim for European strategic autonomy, as we used to call it, and I guess independence is now what we call it. I have no doubt that Starmer is prepared to do that, and it's extraordinary in Britain, the closest ally of the United States, that the debate has shifted even amongst some conservatives, and the opposition conservatives, to this perspective. It would have been inconceivable even 3 months ago.
Now, the UK is planning to up its defense spending to 2.5% of GDP, as I understand it, but to pay for that, to begin slashing its own aid out to the rest of the world. I want to ask you not just about, isn't that terrible? I really want to ask you, are we seeing history restarted again, where America created, with Britain, with others, a lot of the institutions after a world war, after tens of millions of people were killed? Are we going to see things like massive world wars again in response to some of the shocks? Are we going to see, as economies realize, wow, this isn't working out, another Great Depression? Are we going to bring back those parts of the earlier part of the 20th century?
Well, so it's a really good and somewhat important question. I mean, the last time that we had a global power vacuum, and Trump is essentially declaring a power vacuum. He's saying, look, America now sees the world as a jungle We're a big predator. There are other big predators. We don't really care about small predators. And so it's not a system of rules any longer. However hypocritically those rules were upheld or not upheld, however selectively they were applied, there was a system of rules. And people tried to follow it and shouted loudly when America failed to follow. Trump is bringing us back to the interwar world between the First World War and the Second World War, where Britain was too weak to sustain its historic role, the Pax Britannica, as the global hegemon, and America was just totally reluctant after rejecting the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. And therefore we had a vacuum, and power rushes to fill a vacuum. And that is what happened, and that then produced the Second World War. So it tends to be a dangerous time when there is no agreed hegemon, when you have what I call the revenge of geopolitics, the return of history, of course, with a vengeance. You get great danger, and you get great unpredictability, and you get great uncertainty. Every single company in the world now has geopolitics as its number one subject, as its number one risk.
Let me ask you, let me take Donald Trump's side for a moment.
Yeah.
Wasn't this day coming? Did it make sense for America to be the principal guarantor and security arm for Europe while American investment in itself and its infrastructure is crumbling, and you see Europe able to kind of pay all these social benefits? Hasn't Europe been a free rider on America's muscle for a long time? And didn't this day have to one day come, regardless of who was in the White House?
It did, and I fully agree with the premise of your question. It's not just taking Trump's side, it's taking Obama's side, it's taking Bush Jr.'s side, it's taking Bush Sr.'s side, it's taking Clinton's side. Every American president has said, you've got to step up and shoulder more of the burden. And, you know, there could be a silver lining here in that he's shocking and stimulating Europe into doing what presidents who asked nicely got very, very little down the road in achieving.
But let me pause you there. So yeah, he may get that Europe that's very empowered, but that Europe is going to be less maneuverable, less pusher. You can't push that Europe around quite as much. I keep telling people that while President Macron of France kept talking about strategic autonomy and America would kind of pay okay, but at the same time we never wanted Europe to be truly strategically autonomous. We didn't want a superpowered Europe that was disengaged from U.S. power, U.S. decisions. This is a very different moment where Donald Trump is saying, I don't care what you do, and you're no longer consequential in our security map, except maybe as a rival.
This is a case of be careful what you wish for, you might actually get it. I mean, Europe has been infantilized by dependence on the United States. Germany, more than most. Germany's had three pillars of its foreign policy: import cheap Russian energy, use that to manufacture products that you sell to China, and then the third leg of that stool is you leave everything else to America. The nuclear umbrella, the bases, the defense. All three of those legs have been kicked out from under Germany now. So it's been ripe, this moment, in any case, even without Trump. But the manner in which Trump is doing it, it's not in a friendly way. It's not in a we will then be more equal partners if you share more of the burden. It's that you are rivals. You are adversaries. You are there to screw us. He, I think, sees European liberal democracies as basically Democrats abroad. So there's a sort of domestic feel to his foreign policy, particularly with Europe.
I want to tell our audience that if they can, to read an editorial that ran in the Financial Times that was the most blunt, raw depiction of this moment. It was called "America Has Turned on Its Friends." Some of the things that it says are things, if you're not on the table, at the table, you're on the menu. That Trump has contempt for allies, that the world is a jungle in which the big players take what they want. But as you kind of look at it, and you're sitting there and you're Vladimir Putin looking at how his fortunes have just changed so dramatically, I mean, is he getting a green light just to begin proceeding into the territories and the nations around the buffer because he doesn't believe Europe has a security equation anymore that defends itself? NATO membership may not matter anymore for some of those countries. Does Russia get a green light to begin marching through what used to be the Soviet Empire?
Well, you're right. Let's say that Trump did offer Ukraine NATO membership. It's not going to happen. but let's say he did. Since nobody trusts the Article 5, the attack on one is an attack on all, that Trump believes in that or will uphold it, would it be worthless? And I think, for all intents and purposes, NATO is being treated as dead. So it's a recreation of a European NATO that is the goal now. If you look at the Trump critical minerals and gas and oil deal that he's foisting on Ukraine, on Zelensky, without any security guarantee attached, this is very little different to what he's saying about Greenland, or what he's saying about the Panama Canal Zone, which has copper deposits. Greenland allegedly has rare earth and critical minerals. This is part of a sort of drive to get these resources out of China's hands. China has a chokehold on a lot of them, and they are the sort of modern economy. They are key to the future AI economy we're all talking about. So this is a sort of predatory foreign policy.
It's a predatory foreign policy, but it's a foreign policy at the same time. He seems to be turning down the temperature on China, turning down the temperature even on Iran, turning down the temperature clearly with Russia. So is it predatory, or is it kind of also accommodationist of the rogue countries in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to see the UN vote in which America voted against the resolution that blamed Russia for invading Ukraine, with a handful of, really a rogues gallery of
North
countries.
Korea.
North Korea, Russia, Belarus, countries like that, did not include China, did not include Iran. Iran abstained on this question. I think countries all over the world, whatever their ideology, do not want a precedent of bigger neighbors gobbling up smaller ones being seen as okay, and actually turned on its head. The smaller ones are blamed somehow for invading themselves. And you go around Republicans in this town, and you ask them privately who invaded, who's the dictator, they'll all say Putin. In public, they are cowed. They will say, they will refuse to say that Russia invaded Ukraine, a lot of them. And so what the precedent is here for trampling on other countries' sovereignty in parts of the world we haven't discussed or thought about is very ominous.
Do you think Russia's back in the G8? And do you think Donald Trump is going to throw a state dinner celebrating Vladimir Putin in the White House?
I think that Putin is going to invite Trump to the May 9th May Day parade in Moscow.
Oh.
And that Trump will find it very hard to turn that viral, photogenic moment down, him looking over the Red Square with Putin. So I have in the back of my head, and something that Trump said after his 90-minute phone call with Putin, about we fought brother to brother in arms in the Second World War, made me think that offer was dangled during the phone call. This is the kind of thing Trump wouldn't turn down. So I would not be surprised, let's put it that way.
So we're seeing a lot of things that seem so 1930s to me. We see people like Elon Musk and others doing what some are saying look like Nazi salutes. Others, they say, no, that is not what they intended. But you see language, you see positioning, you see embrace of some of the problematic leaders in the world, in this case, Vladimir Putin. Where did this come from in America?
I mean, when does an ironic Nazi salute become unironic?
Right.
It's the question, because it's now becoming a normal trolling and owning the libs. The hatred of sort of liberal, educated, university, New York Times reading, cognitive elite America is a huge part of this, not just domestically, but in terms of foreign policy towards Europe. And in terms of attitudes towards the kinds of things liberals like, multilateral institutions, rules, treating your interlocutors with respect, etc. All of these things are things that Trump explicitly has contempt for, and Musk does too. Musk's criticisms of Germany, his support for the AfD, his criticisms of Keir Starmer, his championing of a sex criminal, Andrew Tate, the Tate brothers, who've now come to the United States. They were being prosecuted in Romania for sex trafficking and sex abuse and pimping and prostitution and running prostitute rackets. They have welcomed the Tate brothers to the United States. That is a middle finger to any sense of sort of rules, decency, decorum, and it's quite intentional. And the reaction of those who support rules, decorum, decency, etc., is the point. This is the politics. And it's also the foreign policy. So we must understand how visceral this is. It's deep.
Let me just ask you finally, you have a book coming out about Zbigniew Brzezinski, President Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. Many of our viewers may not have ever heard of Brzezinski, but I will tell them that he played a key role in really helping to end the Cold War, to bring down the Soviet Union. And he injected values into American foreign policy, I think, in very important ways. We both knew Zbig Brzezinski. I would love to hear what your thoughts of and how he would be reacting to this moment. But do you think there's a Hegelian counterpoint that will begin to grow in America to what they're seeing on the foreign policy move by President Trump?
That's an interesting question. As you know, just as well as I do, Brzezinski was a great rival of Kissinger. Brzezinski was more sort of human rights, values-based. His Polish origins gave him a deep suspicion of the Soviet Union's claims to brotherhood. He saw it essentially as imperialism, dressed up as Marxism. And Kissinger was more of a realist and sort of believed in stabilizing balance of power between big states. The idea, and a lot of apologists for Trump, that Trump is a realist or a prioritizer, switching from Europe to China, is, I think, complete sane-washing of his foreign policy. There is a madness to Trump's foreign policy. I don't think your viewers will need reminding of that Gaza video, that sort of deep fake video that showed the Riviera in the Middle East and golden statues of Trump. And
Netanyahu and Trump in swimming trunks,
yes.
you know.
And Musk throwing around dollar bills.
But we say that while it was a deep fake, AI-generated video, it was one that President Trump put out himself on his Truth Social
This is
network.
madness.
Yeah.
This is madness. And we have a very fragile, talking of Brzezinski in the Carter era, situation between Israel and Egypt, the oldest and most valuable peace deal brought about by America, could only be sustained by America. America's not interested. Steve Witkoff, his envoy, sees the Middle East as a real estate opportunity. And I went to an event the other night where that is exactly how he described it verbatim. He sees it as a real estate opportunity. There's a touch of madness. This isn't a foreign policy school. There's a touch of genuine insanity in this approach to the rest of the world.
Well, Financial Times chief U.S. commentator and columnist Ed Luce, thank you so much for joining us today. Very, very fascinating time we're in.
Always a pleasure, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? We forget because it was a long time ago, but the United States used to be a fairly isolationist country. It took Herculean leadership by the presidents during World War I and World War II for America to actually become part of the global challenges then, where 20 million people died. America made a huge investment through the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, and it created NATO both to perpetuate American power, but also to preempt any other wars on the continent. Back then, America's chief rival was the Soviet Union, and many in the West still conflate that old USSR with modern-day Russia. But President Donald Trump doesn't see Russia as the enemy, but he does see Europe as the bad guy in this story. It's a dramatic shift in American policy that's creating uncertainty around the world, which is another Trump trademark. Everything we thought we knew about U.S. foreign policy is being turned upside down, and that's just not likely to go smoothly. And that's the bottom line.